A shocking revelation about her valet's true identity leaves a millionaire woman questioning everything she thought she knew. And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala buzzed with conversation and clinking champagne glasses. Samantha Whitmore stood alone near a marble column, her black designer dress a stark contrast against the cream-colored stone. Despite being the host and CEO of one of the city's largest investment firms, she felt oddly disconnected from the festivities. Her eyes drifted across the room, following Marcus Johnson as he navigated through the crowd with practiced ease. As her valet for the past year, he moved with a grace that seemed incongruous with his position. He wasn't just serving drinks. He was reading the room, anticipating needs before they arose, and handling difficult guests with a diplomat's touch. Samantha noticed details she'd overlooked before. The way his uniform fit perfectly across his shoulders, how his hands moved with artistic precision when serving drinks, and the subtle intelligence behind his eyes when he engaged in brief conversations with guests. He was different from the other staff members, carrying himself with an understated confidence that made him stand out to those who paid attention. Throughout the evening, their paths crossed multiple times. Each interaction, though brief, carried a charge of electricity. When Marcus handed her a fresh glass of water, he'd noticed she wasn't drinking alcohol. Their fingers brushed momentarily. The contact sent a jolt through Samantha's body that had nothing to do with static electricity. "Will you need anything else, Ms. Whitmore?" Marcus asked, his voice low and professional, but his eyes conveying something deeper. "No, thank you, Marcus," she replied, holding his gaze a moment longer than necessary. The corner of his mouth twitched in a barely perceptible smile before he moved away to attend to other guests. As the night progressed, Samantha found herself engaging in meaningless conversations with board members and potential investors, all while hyper-aware of Marcus's presence in the room. She caught him watching her several times, his expression thoughtful and intense. During a particularly dull conversation about market projections, their eyes met across the room. He raised an eyebrow slightly, as if sharing a private joke about the tedious nature of these events. The connection felt real and immediate, unlike anything Samantha had experienced in years of corporate networking and society events. Here was someone who seemed to see beyond her title and bank account, who understood the loneliness of maintaining appearances. After the last guest departed, Samantha retreated to her private bathroom at home. Her hands shook as she opened the pregnancy test box, her mind replaying moments from 6 weeks ago, a late night at the office, Marcus bringing her dinner, one thing leading to another. They'd both agreed it was a mistake, maintaining professional distance afterward, but something had changed between them. The 3 minutes of waiting felt like hours. Samantha paced the marble floor, her heels clicking against the tile. When the timer on her phone chimed, she forced herself to look at the test. 2 pink lines. She sank onto the edge of her bathtub, the cold porcelain seeping through her dress. The test fell from her trembling fingers, clattering on the floor. The sound echoed in the empty bathroom, emphasizing the weight of her solitude in this moment. Pregnant, with her valet's child. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years building her reputation as a shrewd businesswoman, someone who never let emotions cloud her judgment. Now here she was, facing a situation that could potentially unravel everything she'd worked for. But as the initial shock subsided, Samantha realized something else. She wasn't as scared or upset as she should be. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. This wasn't just any man's child, it was Marcus's. The man who'd shown her more genuine understanding and silent glances than she'd experienced in years of high society relationships. Still, the question remained. How would she tell him? More importantly, how would this news affect the delicate dynamic they'd established? As she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, Samantha saw beyond her perfectly maintained exterior to the vulnerability beneath. For the first time in her adult life, she had no strategy, no backup plan, no way to control the outcome of the situation. In a dimly lit coffee shop across town, Marcus sat with his longtime friend David, his valet uniform replaced by casual jeans and a worn leather jacket. The contrast between his daytime persona and his current appearance was striking. "I can't keep doing this forever," Marcus said, absently stirring his black coffee. "The valet position was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while I built my portfolio." David leaned back in his chair, studying his friend's face. "Your art's getting noticed, man. That gallery downtown is interested in showing your work. Maybe it's time to make the jump." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos of his latest paintings. Bold strokes of color captured moments of wealth and isolation, scenes inspired by his observations at the Whitmore estate. One particular piece, showing a solitary woman in an evening gown standing before a wall of windows, bore a striking resemblance to Samantha. "It's not that simple," Marcus replied, putting his phone away. "The job provides stability, connections." And he trailed off, unwilling to voice the real reason for his hesitation. "And there's something else keeping you there," David finished, giving Marcus a knowing look. "Or someone." Marcus didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. The image of Samantha at the gala floated in his mind. Her quiet strength, the moments when her carefully maintained facade cracked to reveal genuine emotion. Across town, Samantha sat in her home office, staring at her phone. Marcus's contact information glowed on the screen. The pregnancy test results from that morning weighed heavily on her mind. She drafted and deleted a dozen messages, none of them adequately conveying what she needed to say. How do you tell someone who works for you that you're carrying their child? Every potential scenario she played out in her head ended in disaster. Would he feel trapped? Obligated? Would he think she planned this somehow? The intercom buzzed, startling her. Marcus's voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Whitmore, your evening tea." Samantha pressed the intercom button, her finger trembling slightly. "Come in, Marcus." He entered carrying a silver tray with her usual chamomile tea. But tonight, the familiar routine felt different. As he set the tray down, Samantha noticed the grace in his movements, the artistic quality in how he arranged everything just so. "Marcus," she said, stopping him before he could leave. "Could you stay for a moment?" He turned, his expression professional, but his eyes revealing curiosity. "Of course, Ms. Whitmore." Samantha gestured to the chair across from her desk. As he sat down, she noticed how he perched on the edge, still maintaining the proper distance between employer and employee despite everything that had happened between them. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice softer than usual, "about the future, about changes that are coming." She watched his face carefully, wondering if he could sense the weight behind her words. "Changes, Ms. Whitmore?" His voice remained steady, but she noticed his hands tightened slightly on the armrests. "I'm not sure I can maintain this facade anymore," she admitted. "This perfect image everyone expects. Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees the real me at all." For a moment, Marcus's professional mask slipped. "I see you," he said quietly, then quickly added, "Ms. Whitmore." The words hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Samantha felt the truth of the pregnancy pressing against her lips, demanding to be spoken. But fear held her back. Fear of disrupting this delicate moment. Fear of shattering whatever this was between them. Instead, she found herself talking about her insecurities, about the loneliness of her position, about the exhaustion of constantly meeting others' expectations. Marcus listened intently, offering occasional insights that revealed his own understanding of feeling caught between worlds. When he finally left, the words remained unspoken, the truth still hidden. But something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a recognition of shared vulnerability. Samantha watched him go, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach, where their secret grew stronger each day. The art gallery was smaller than Samantha expected, tucked away in a gentrifying neighborhood far from her usual social circles. Walking through the door, she felt oddly exposed without her usual corporate armor, dressed instead in a simple black dress and minimal jewelry. Marcus's paintings lined the walls, each one revealing a perspective of high society that only an insider-outsider could capture. Samantha moved from piece to piece, recognizing scenes from her own world viewed through his eyes. The hollow laughter at charity events, the pristine loneliness of mansion dining rooms, the careful distance between people despite their physical proximity. "They're extraordinary," she said when Marcus appeared beside her. Out of his valet uniform, wearing dark jeans and a fitted blazer, he looked like he belonged among the other artists. "Thank you for coming," he replied softly. "It means a lot that you're here." Before Samantha could respond, a familiar voice cut through the gallery chatter. "Sam, is that really you in a place like this?" Jake Peterson strode toward them, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair marking him as a transplant from their usual social sphere. He was exactly as Samantha remembered from their brief relationship 2 years ago. Handsome, confident, and completely unable to see beyond surface appearances. "Jake," she acknowledged, noticing how Marcus tensed beside her. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I've been getting into the art scene lately," Jake said, his eyes flickering dismissively over Marcus before returning to Samantha. "But what brings you to this part of town? Surely you're not interested in—" He gestured vaguely at the paintings. "Actually, these are Marcus's works," Samantha said firmly. "He's the featured artist tonight." Jake's expression shifted, recognition dawning. "Marcus? Your valet? Well, isn't that interesting?" The condescension in his voice was barely veiled. Marcus straightened, his jaw tightening. "If you'll excuse me, I should greet some other guests." He moved away before Samantha could stop him, leaving her alone with Jake. "Really, Sam?" Jake stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know you've always had a rebellious streak, but this is beneath you. A valet who plays at being an artist." "His work speaks for itself," Samantha replied coldly, but Jake pressed on. "Come on, we both know what this is. You're slumming it for a thrill. Remember who you are, where you come from. This isn't your world." From across the room, Marcus watched their interaction. He saw how Jake leaned in familiarly, how naturally he fit beside Samantha in his expensive suit and practiced charm. They looked right together, two people from the same world, speaking the same language of privilege and power. Moving through the crowd, Marcus overheard snippets of conversation about his work. Art critics praised his outsider's perspective on high society, never guessing that he'd been born into that world before his family's fall from grace. The irony wasn't lost on him. He found himself in front of his centerpiece, a large canvas showing a woman in a business suit standing alone in a crowded room, her isolation palpable despite the press of bodies around her. He'd painted it thinking of Samantha, but now the feeling of alienation reflected his own state of mind. "It's beautiful," said a voice beside him. He turned to find Samantha, who'd apparently escaped Jake. "You captured exactly how it feels. Sometimes I wonder if I'm capturing how it feels for you, or for me," Marcus admitted. "Maybe both," she replied. Then, more quietly, "Jake doesn't matter. He never did." But Marcus had seen the easy familiarity between them, the shared understanding of a world he only served now. He thought of the paintings around them, of how his art revealed the barriers between social classes. He'd fooled himself into thinking he could bridge that gap, but reality was asserting itself. "Ms. Whitmore," he said formally, creating distance with her title, "perhaps it would be better if we maintained proper boundaries going forward." The hurt that flashed across Samantha's face was quick, but unmistakable. She opened her mouth to respond, one hand unconsciously moving to her stomach, a gesture Marcus didn't notice, too caught up in his own insecurities. Before she could speak, another group of gallery patrons approached, eager to meet the artist. The moment passed, leaving both of them with words unsaid and growing uncertainty about their future. The phone call from her mother came at precisely 9 a.m., as it did every Sunday morning. Samantha sat in her home office, watching autumn leaves fall outside her window as her mother's voice carried through the speaker. "Darling, I've arranged a lovely lunch with Jake next Wednesday at Le Cirque. He's been asking about you, and frankly, it's time we address this situation with your valet." Samantha's grip tightened on her phone. "Mother, there's no situation to address. Don't be naive, dear. People are talking. The way you showed up at that shabby little gallery opening. Really, Samantha, what were you thinking?" Meanwhile, across town, Marcus faced his own confrontation. A woman in a crisp blazer approached him as he left his apartment building, notebook in hand. "Mr. Johnson? Or should I say, Mr. Marcus Blackwood III?" The reporter's smile was shark-like. Rebecca Chun from the Daily Chronicle. Care to comment on why the heir to the Blackwood shipping fortune is working as a valet? Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He hadn't heard his real name spoken aloud in years, not since his family's empire had crumbled and he'd reinvented himself. "I'm afraid you have the wrong person," he said, trying to move past her. "We have proof," Rebecca continued, pulling out a folder. "Your grandfather's company didn't just collapse. It was systematically dismantled from within. Interesting timing, considering your recent connection to Whitmore Enterprises." Marcus stopped cold. "What are you implying?" "Oh, nothing specific. Just wondering if your position in the Whitmore household might be more strategic than it appears." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Would Samantha think he'd orchestrated everything? That he'd deliberately gotten close to her for some kind of revenge or financial gain? Back at her office, Samantha was still dealing with her mother's disapproval. "Jake comes from the right background," her mother continued. "He understands our world. This Marcus person, he's an employee, darling. And now I hear he's putting on art shows? It's all rather desperate. His art is genuine, mother. He has real talent. Talent doesn't equal suitability, dear. Think of the company's image. Think of your future." Samantha's hand drifted to her still flat stomach. Her future was already irrevocably linked with Marcus's, though her mother didn't know it yet. At that moment, Marcus sat in a small cafe, staring at the dock. Immense Rebecca had left behind. His family's history was laid bare in black and white. The suspicious stock trades, the mysterious account transfers, the orchestrated collapse that had sent his father into an early grave and left their name in ruins. But there was more. His grandfather had been working on a revolutionary shipping automation system before his death. The patents had vanished, only to resurface years later under another company's name, a subsidiary of Whitmore Enterprises. Marcus felt sick. He'd walked away from his old life, built something new, found unexpected love. Now the past threatened to poison everything. Would Samantha believe he'd gotten close to her for revenge? Would she see their night together as part of some elaborate scheme? His phone buzzed, a message from Samantha. "Can we talk? There's something important I need to tell you." Marcus stared at the screen, his heart heavy. The timing couldn't be worse. If she learned about his true identity now, combined with the suspicious connection between their families' histories, would she ever trust that his feelings were genuine? He thought of her standing in his gallery, defending his work to Jake. He thought of quiet moments bringing her tea, of shared glances that said more than words. He thought of the life he'd built from the ashes of his family's disgrace. The truth about his past could destroy everything, but keeping it hidden felt like a betrayal of the trust growing between them. Either way, he risked losing her. His finger hovered over the phone's keyboard, torn between protecting himself and being honest with the woman he'd grown to love. The weight of family history, social expectations, and personal desire pressed down on him like a physical force. Finally, he typed, "There's something I need to tell you too, but not over the phone." The response came immediately. "Come to my office tomorrow morning." Marcus pocketed his phone, knowing that tomorrow's conversation would change everything. He just wasn't sure if it would bring them closer together or tear them apart forever. Samantha never made it to that meeting. The morning brought intense nausea, another reminder of her changing condition. And by the time she felt well enough to leave, Marcus had called in sick for the first time since starting his job. She drove to his apartment building, rehearsing what she would say. The pregnancy test was in her purse, proof of the bond they couldn't ignore. But his small walk-up apartment was empty, the neighbor mentioning she'd seen him leave early with a suitcase. Her mother's call came as Samantha sat in her parked car, staring at Marcus's dark windows. "I need to see you immediately." Elizabeth Whitmore's tone brooked no argument. "This concerns your future." The Whitmore mansion hadn't changed since Samantha's childhood. Still imposing, still perfect, still cold. Her mother waited in the conservatory, surrounded by precisely pruned orchids. "I've been doing some research on your friend," Elizabeth began, sliding a folder across the glass table. "Did you know he's been lying about his identity?" Samantha's hand froze above the folder. "What?" "Marcus Johnson is actually Marcus Blackwood III. His family's company was our biggest competitor before their spectacular fall. Surely you remember the scandal. Samantha did remember. She'd been in college when the Blackwood shipping empire collapsed, taking thousands of jobs with it. Her father had called it the business opportunity of a decade, acquiring their patents and market share for pennies on the dollar. He's been working for us under false pretenses, Elizabeth continued. Really, darling, did you think someone of his obvious breeding would choose to be a valet? He's clearly planning something. You don't know him, Samantha protested, but doubt crept in. Why had he hidden this? I know his type. Men who've lost everything are dangerous. They'll do anything to reclaim their position. Isabeth's perfectly manicured hand covered Samantha's. You need to end this now, before he ruins everything your father built. Samantha pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. The morning sickness returned, forcing her to grip the back of her chair. Darling, are you all right? Her mother's concern felt suffocating. I'm fine, Samantha managed. I need air. She drove home in a daze, her mother's words mixing with memories of Marcus. His gentle hands serving tea, his passionate description of his artwork, the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Her house felt empty without his quiet presence. She checked her phone again. No messages, no calls. The silence spoke volumes. Then she saw it. An envelope on her desk, her name written in Marcus's distinctive artist's hand. Dear Samantha, by now you probably know the truth about who I am. I never meant to deceive you. When I lost everything, art saved me. Being your valet gave me purpose, and falling in love with you gave me hope. But I can't be the reason your life unravels. You deserve the perfect future everyone expects for you. The right husband, the right connections, the right image. I'm none of those things. I'm leaving for the artist residency in Paris. They accepted my application months ago, but I couldn't bear to leave you. Now I see it's the kindest thing I can do. Please don't look for me. Some walls aren't meant to be broken. Asterisk Marcus. The letter slipped from Samantha's trembling fingers. One hand pressed against her stomach, where their child grew, unknown to its father. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of everything crashed down. His hidden identity, his sudden departure, the impossible choice between her family's expectations and her heart's desires. The sun set outside her window, casting long shadows across her office. In the growing darkness, Samantha Whitmore, powerful CEO, perfect daughter, expectant mother, allowed herself to cry for everything she'd found and lost in the span of a single day. The pregnancy test sat in her purse, its life-changing message now complicated by lies, family history, and a love that had slipped away before she could tell him the truth that would have made running impossible. The annual Whitmore Foundation charity Leilao was the last place Samantha wanted to be, but as CEO, her presence was mandatory. She stood in the grand ballroom of the Ritz, barely listening to the auctioneer's rapid-fire delivery, when a familiar name cut through her fog. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, a collection of works by rising star Marcus Johnson, recently accepted into the prestigious Paris Arts program. Samantha's head snapped up. The screens around the room filled with images of his paintings, not the ones from his previous show, but new pieces. Her breath caught as she recognized herself in every canvas. A woman in various stages of isolation, strength, and vulnerability, each painting capturing a different facet of their shared moments. Then she saw him. Marcus stood at the side of the stage, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that reminded her of how far he was from the valet uniform he'd worn for so long. The audience fell silent as he stepped to the microphone. Before we begin the bidding, he said, his voice steady but intimate, I'd like to explain what inspired this collection. Samantha couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Around her, the social elite of the city leaned forward, drawn in by the quiet intensity of his presence. These pieces are about walls, Marcus continued. Not the physical ones we build with stone and steel, but the invisible barriers we construct around our hearts. Some walls are built by society, some by family expectations, and some, his eyes found Samantha's across the room, some we build ourselves out of fear. The crowd murmured appreciatively, seeing only the artistry, missing the raw confession in his words. But Samantha heard everything he wasn't saying. Each painting represents a moment of truth, Marcus said, gesturing to the screens. The moment we decide if our walls will be our fortress or our prison, if we'll let them protect us from pain or prevent us from experiencing love. The first painting appeared on screen, Samantha at the gala, standing alone by the marble column. Then the second, her office at sunset, the tea service between them. Finally, the centerpiece, a woman very clearly Samantha, standing before a shattered mirror, each fragment reflecting a different version of herself. The bidding began, quickly escalating as collectors recognized the emotion and technical skill in each piece. But Samantha barely heard the numbers. She watched Marcus, seeing for the first time how he commanded the room, not with practiced charm like Jake, but with genuine passion and vulnerability. This was no social climber seeking revenge. This was an artist laying his soul bare through his work. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, finally stepping fully into himself. When Marcus finished his presentation, the applause was thunderous. Art critics in the audience were already typing on their phones, no doubt praising the emergence of a major new talent. But he didn't stay to bask in the acclaim. He slipped away through a side door, and Samantha knew this might be her last chance. She moved to follow him, but her mother's hand gripped her arm. "Samantha, don't. Think of the headlines." For the first time in her life, Samantha looked at her mother and felt not intimidation but pity. "The headlines? Look at what he just created, Mother. Look at how the room responded. He's not destroying our world. He's creating something new, something real." "He's still lying about who he is," Elizabeth hissed. "No," Samantha said firmly, pulling free. "He just told the whole truth through his art. I'm the one who's been lying. To myself, to him, to everyone. But not anymore." She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares. The weight of her pregnancy's secret, carried alone for weeks now, gave her steps purpose. Marcus needed to know everything about the baby, about her feelings, about her willingness to break down every wall between them. But when she reached the side door, he was already gone. Samantha found Marcus on the hotel's rooftop garden, his silhouette stark against the city lights. He heard her heels on the stone path, but didn't turn around. "Your work," she said softly. "It's more than art. It's truth. Truth." His laugh was hollow. "I built my new life on a lie." "So did I." Samantha moved to stand beside him. "I've been lying to everyone for weeks now, but mostly to myself, pretending I could handle everything alone." Something in her voice made him turn. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the stone balustrade. "I'm pregnant, Marcus." The words hung in the cool night air. She watched his face transform, shock, confusion, realization, and finally, a complex mix of joy and terror. "How long?" he whispered. "I found out the morning after the gala. I've been trying to tell you, but then everything with your identity came out, and you left." Marcus gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "A baby," he said, as if testing the word. Then, with a bitter laugh, "I couldn't even tell you who I really was." "What right do I have to be a father?" "The same right I have to be a mother," Samantha countered. "Do you think I know what I'm doing? I run a company. I manage billions in assets. But this..." She placed a hand on her stomach. "This terrifies me." "You don't understand." Marcus turned to her, his face anguished. "My family's reputation, the scandal. Our child would inherit all of that. Our child will inherit your passion, your talent, your courage to rebuild from nothing." Samantha stepped closer. "And yes, maybe some of my business sense too. But most importantly, they'll know they come from love. Real love, not the arranged marriages and social contract. T.S. I grew up with." Marcus stared at her, conflict clear in his eyes. "I'm not ashamed of becoming a valet," he said finally. "That job gave me time to paint, to observe, to understand both worlds. But I am ashamed of not telling you the truth sooner. When I saw the connection between our family's companies..." "Stop," Samantha interrupted. "Whatever happened between our family's businesses, that's the past. This..." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "This is our future." The touch seemed to break something in Marcus. He pulled her close, one hand still resting where their child grew, the other cradling her head. "I've spent years painting walls and barriers," he murmured into her hair. never thinking I'd find someone willing to break them down with me. I'm not just willing, Samantha said, drawing back to meet his eyes. I'm ready. Whatever comes next, the press, our families, society, we face it together. Together, Marcus repeated, then smiled slightly. The valet and the CEO. The artist and the businesswoman, Samantha corrected. And soon mother and father. They stood in silence for a moment, his hands still protective over their unborn child, both contemplating the magnitude of change ahead. I can't promise it will be easy, Marcus said finally. My past is part of who you are, Samantha finished. Just like my privilege is part of who I am, but neither defines who we choose to be now. The city hummed below them, unaware that on this rooftop, two people from different worlds were choosing to create a new one together. Their child would be born into a story of redemption, of art and business, of walls broken down by love. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, a slight flutter moved beneath their joined hands. Too early to be the baby, but perhaps the beginning of something else. Hope. Elizabeth Whitmore's reaction to the pregnancy announcement was exactly as explosive as Samantha had expected. The pristine walls of the family mansion practically vibrated with her mother's anger. This was his plan all along. Elizabeth paced the formal living room, her perfect composure finally cracking. He seduced you to reclaim his family's position. Don't you see? First a baby, then marriage, then he'll have access to everything your father built. Mother stopped. Samantha stood her ground, one protective hand on her slightly visible bump. Marcus didn't even want to tell me his real identity because he feared exactly this reaction. Oh, how convenient, Elizabeth sneered. And I suppose he told you some romantic story about choosing to become a valet to pursue his art? Wake up, Samantha. Men like Marcus Blackwood don't choose to serve drinks unless they have an agenda. You don't know him. I knew his father. Elizabeth shot back, then stopped abruptly, as if she'd said too much. Samantha's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? You knew his father? It's not important, Elizabeth waved dismissively, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Mother. Samantha's voice took on the steel edge she usually reserved for hostile takeovers. What aren't you telling me? Elizabeth sank into an armchair, suddenly looking older than her years. Your father. He wasn't the only one interested in Blackwood Shipping's patents before the collapse. What are you saying? James Blackwood and we had an understanding. If he sold to us instead of our competitors, certain arrangements would be made. A merger of families, not just companies. Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. You were supposed to marry Marcus back then, create a clean transition of power. Samantha felt the room spin. You arranged my marriage when I was in college. It would have been perfect. But then James killed himself. Those patents mysteriously disappeared, and Marcus vanished with what was left of his trust fund. Elizabeth's eyes hardened. Now he's back playing servant, getting close to you. Don't you, Finn? The timing's suspicious. The timing? Samantha's voice rose. I fell in love with him without knowing who he was. He tried to keep his distance, tried to leave when the truth came out. If he was plotting revenge, he's doing a terrible job of it. Love. Elizabeth spat the word like poison. Love doesn't pay shareholders or maintain market position. Love doesn't protect family legacies. No, Samantha agreed quietly. Love breaks down walls. Love creates new legacies. And this baby, she pressed her hand to her stomach, will be born into a world where art and business can coexist, where old grudges don't poison new beginnings. You naive girl, Elizabeth stood, her voice deadly quiet. You want to know the real truth about the Blackwoods? About why Marcus might really be here? She moved to the antique desk, pulling out a thick file. Read this. See how deep the betrayal goes. Then tell me about love and new beginnings. The file landed on the coffee table between them with a heavy thud. Through the manila envelope, Samantha could see the Whitmore Enterprises logo and a single word stamped in red, classified. Her hand hovered over the file, trembling slightly. Inside could be proof of her mother's accusations, or proof of something else entirely. Either way, the truth waited to shatter whatever fragile piece she and Marcus had found. Read it, Elizabeth urged. See who you're really carrying a child for. The weight of generations of business rivalry, family expectations, and hidden agendas pressed down on Samantha's shoulders. But as her hand touched the file, she felt another flutter of movement in her womb. A reminder that the future didn't have to repeat the past's mistakes. Whatever secrets that file held, they would face them together. She and Marcus had already chosen love over fear, truth over convenience. Now they would choose their own path, regardless of the cost. The file sat unopened on Marcus's kitchen counter, while Samantha paced his small apartment. He stood by the window, his artist's hands gripping a cold cup of coffee, waiting. "Before I open this," Samantha said, "I need to know your version. All of it." Marcus set down his cup. "The official story was that my father embezzled company funds, then killed himself out of shame. The truth? He found something in the company records, something that made him dangerous to certain people." "What did he find?" "I don't know exactly. He tried to tell me the night he died, but all he managed to say was the patents aren't what they seem." The next morning, they found him in his study. Marcus's voice grew tight. "The police called it suicide. I called it convenient timing." Samantha approached the file, her fingers tracing the red classified stamp. "And you became a valet at Whitmore Enterprises to investigate?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "I became a valet because I needed work that would let me paint. Whitmore Enterprises was just another corporation looking for staff. When I realized where I was..." He paused. "I almost quit that first day, but then I met you." Samantha opened the file. Documents spilled across the counter, financial reports, patent applications, old photographs. She began sorting through them methodically, her business training taking over. "Look at this," she said suddenly. "The shipping automation patents your father was working on? The filing dates are wrong." Marcus leaned in, studying the papers. "What do you mean?" "These patents were filed 6 months before the company collapsed, but they're dated 3 months after. And the inventor listed isn't your father. It's someone named Alan Pierce." "I've never heard of him." "You wouldn't have," Samantha was already typing on her phone, "because Alan Pierce doesn't exist. But look at these bank transfers. Regular payments from an offshore account to Pierce for years after the patents were filed." Marcus stared at the evidence of systematic fraud. "Someone stole my father's work, then to cover it up." "Not someone," Samantha's voice was ice. "Whitmore Enterprises. My father's signature is on these authorizations." She kept reading, her face growing paler. "The merger my mother mentioned? It wasn't a merger at all. They were planning a hostile takeover. And my father found out. He must have threatened to expose everything." Samantha's hands shook as she turned another page. "Marcus, the night your father died, there were 3 calls from our house to your estate." The implications hung heavy in the air. Marcus gripped the counter, his knuckles white. "All these years, I thought losing everything was the worst part. But this changes nothing," Samantha said firmly, placing her hand over his. "What our parents did, the lies, the theft, the possible murder, that's their legacy, not ours. Samantha, they killed my father over patents. Then we exposed them, properly, legally. We used the truth to break down the last walls between us." She pressed his hand to her growing bump. "For the future, not the past." Marcus felt the baby move, a tiny flutter against his palm. The sensation seemed to ground him, pulling him back from the edge of revenge. "Your mother gave you this file to drive us apart," he realized. "She underestimated us both." Samantha gathered the documents carefully. "I know an investigative reporter who specializes in corporate fraud, and I have a board meeting next week. You'll risk everything? Your position, your reputation? For justice? For love? For our child?" Samantha met his eyes. "Some risks are worth taking." Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that in a small apartment, 2 people were choosing to rewrite a story of corruption and revenge into one of truth and redemption. Their child kicked again, stronger this time, as if approving the choice. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And they would write it together, with paint and boardroom decisions, with truth and courage, with love strong enough to break down every wall built by fear and greed. The gallery opening at the Metropolitan Museum of Art buzzed with anticipation. Marcus's exhibition, Walls and Bridges, had already generated significant press, but tonight wasn't just about art. Tonight was about truth. Samantha stood at the podium, her 7-month pregnant belly visible beneath her elegant dress. Camera flashes lit up the room as she began to speak. 10 years ago, Whitmore Enterprises acquired patents that revolutionized the shipping industry. Tonight, we're setting the record straight about their true creator. She gestured to a covered painting. But first, I want to talk about Walls. The crowd murmured as Marcus joined her, their fingers intertwining naturally. The society pages would later call it a perfect photo op, the CEO and the artist, the heiress and the former valet. But they didn't know the whole story. Not yet. James Blackwood was more than an innovator, Samantha continued. He was a man who discovered corporate fraud at the highest levels, who died trying to expose the truth. Today, Whitmore Enterprises is returning all patents to their rightful owner, his son, Marcus. The crowd erupted in whispers. In the back, Elizabeth Whitmore's face went pale as federal agents quietly moved to block the exits. Furthermore, Samantha's voice cut through the chaos. The board has approved a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding James Blackwood's death, with all findings to be turned over to the proper authorities. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. But this evening isn't about corporate espionage or family revenge. It's about choosing a different path. He unveiled the central painting, a massive canvas showing 2 figures standing before a crumbling wall, while behind them, a bridge built itself from the fallen stones. The figures were clearly him and Samantha, but they weren't alone in the image. Between them, a small child reached toward the future. My father died because old men couldn't see past their walls of greed and power, Marcus said. Tonight, we're not just returning stolen patents. We're announcing the creation of the Blackwood Whitmore Foundation for Innovation and Arts. Samantha took over seamlessly. Every year, we'll fund projects that bridge divides between art and commerce, between social classes, between past wounds and future healing. The crowd's mood shifted from scandal to inspiration as Marcus unveiled more paintings. Each one told their story. The lonely CEO and the artist Valet, the pregnant woman choosing love over dynasty, the couple fighting for truth instead of revenge. Then a familiar figure stepped forward, Harrison Chun, the business legend who'd vanished from public life years ago. I've been watching this story unfold. Chen's voice carried authority earned over decades. When James Blackwood came to me 10 years ago with concerns about patent theft, I helped him document everything. I've held that evidence, waiting for the right moment, the right people, to bring justice without perpetuating cycles of revenge. He turned to Marcus and Samantha. Your father would be proud, son, not just of your art or your courage, but of your choice to build rather than destroy. The baby chose that moment to kick forcefully. Samantha laughed, drawing Marcus's hand to her belly. Around them, cameras flashed and reporters scribbled, but in that moment, they were just 2 people feeling their child move. Ready for the next chapter? Marcus whispered. Samantha watched as federal agents quietly escorted her mother from the building. The dynasty she'd been born to protect was transforming into something new, something better. More than ready, she replied. Though I think this little one's going to write their own story. Good. Marcus smiled. The world has enough walls. Time for some bridges. The evening ended with an announcement that shocked even the most jaded socialites. Samantha and Marcus would be married right there, surrounded by his art and their shared vision of the future. As they exchanged vows, their unborn child kicked steadily, already part of the new world they were building. One where love conquered greed, truth defeated lies, and art transformed pain into beauty. The walls had finally fallen, and the bridges were just beginning to rise.